Here we are. We've come on a little bit early. Thank you so much, all of you. I'm trying not to look at that number next to participants, because that's a big number. So I'm just seeing the faces I can see on my mini screen, and that feels intimate and bijou, and do you know what I mean? A tiny little gathering, but quite genuinely, thank you so much. It's an absolute privilege for myself and Akima to be here, talking on behalf of women's centres and feminist organisations. And just before I hand to Akima, myself and Akima are here because, let me tell you why we're here. So we're here because women survivors of violence and abuse are submerged. They're submerged in a sea of labels and done-to processes, prized apart from their stories, their past, themselves. Survivors are often being asked to jump through a plethora of hoops, many of which are re-traumatising. They're asked to traverse hard to navigate depersonalising services. They're continually asked what's wrong, as opposed to being invited to tell their stories, all in the name of treatment. I'm going to do a few of those. I know Joe Watson said to start dropping them, but all in the name of treatment. However, these hoops, and what we know from Women and Girls Network and the Women's Centre Cornwall, are all too often far from being entrances to worlds conducive to healing. So we've got to start asking ourselves why we're pointing in those directions if they're not conducive to healing. So women are often burdened and indeed buckling under the weight of labels and illnesses and diagnoses, and it's no longer ethical to look the other way. We knew we had to do something. So Women and Girls Network in London and the Women's Centre Cornwall, I was going to call that global, but then I saw the lineup and there's people from New Zealand and America, so we'll be Cornwall and London. We're going to give you a flavour of what a chapter we're in the process of writing for the second Drop the Disorder book. Just a little taster, which explores how we can and indeed must play our role in challenging the pathologising of women's experiences of violence and abuse. So, Akima, I'm going to tag team Akima, who's going to talk to us all about resistance, rebellion, and revolutionary love, and why indeed not. So she's going to talk about those concepts in relation to survivor activism and how doing something must involve dissecting and reframing our thinking and ensuring that survivors are forever positioned at the heart of this. Akima, over to your good self.
Okay, so thank you. Greetings, troublemakers out there globally. Wonderful to be in space with you. So, I'm gonna read from something that I prepared because I can't go off piece, and I know I would go off piece because I've been so excited to be here with you. So forgive me with indulging and reading, and obviously I'm one of the hosts, so I can't possibly go over time. So let me just start. So, we don't have cliches or techniques to share with you. It was really important for us today to be holding truth to power and offering a reconceptualization of working with survivor activists in designing, framing, and underpinning our work, not as abstract concepts, but as critical points of analysis and practice. For both of our centres, it's been about moving beyond the cliched language of survivor-led to survivor activism. The bold, proactive steps created by survivors to set the agenda as agents of political change, as liberators and as advocates. The activism of survivors is necessary as they face a system that offers limited respite or healing, but rather adds further to the burden of subjugation and distress, with meaningless diagnoses that weigh heavy, offering no hope of escape, rescue or relief. When you listen deeply to survivors and what they share in their stories of survival, it is in no way disordered, but incredibly ordered, bold, brave, precise and systematic in their fight for survival. At Wagon, we wanted to ensure survivor activism is front and centre of all the work that we do. We understand that survival is an active, dynamic, mindful process fueled by survivors' righteous anger at how their pain and distress has been responded to. From survivors' narratives, we understand that healing is not linear and certainly not determined by commissioners' outcome frameworks. It is, however, organic and creative in a wide spectrum of possibility, with our role to ensure we validate, respect, trust and honour the past survivors' truths. This meant reimagining of our survivor perspectives, from merely surviving to a triumphant survivor activist, For us, it was a call out to challenge and disrupt systems of harm that aim to discredit, stigmatise and pathologise survivors' enormous efforts to heal. We, throughout all facets of our work, is a clear mandate as troublemakers to advocate on a social justice level with a focused imperative to disrupt the systems of harm which impact on the lives of survivors. WAGON's Womenfesto aims to inspire individual resistance, collective rebellion, and our work with survivors centred on revolutionary love. So, we hear survivors' resistance to the domination and subjugation by perpetrators. They resist and are defiant in protecting their honour and dignity in direct ways with actions intended to thwart the perpetrator, or indirectly with self-protective mechanisms such as dissociation and cyclically removing themselves to keep safe. It is this recognition of survivors' strengths to resist, the courage, to the tenacity and determination to never surrender. Resistance isn't just a response to power, but a form of power. It's creative and expansive, opening to possibilities that align survivors collectively with other freedom fighters, representing the potential for revolution, driving cultural and social transformation. Take, for example, the conversation with Tarana Burke and the 16-year-old who discloses their experiences of sexual violence. That conversation sets a whole rebellion in process. It becomes the catalyst for the Me Too movement. This rebellion generated a seismic shift, fundamentally transforming the story of how we speak about sexual assault, shifting the narrative from shame and blame, silence to voice to roar. Patriarchal systems are predominantly built on anger, hate, aggression, relying on alienation, individualism, destruction and fragmentation. As a counter-response, the black activist feminism of WAGON has a heartbeat based on revolutionary love. We reject the cold objectivity of traditional therapies, instead ensuring heart connection with solidarity, care, compassion, acceptance, nurturing, warmth and love directed at our work with survivors. But revolutionary love is also a bold, fierce love, passionate, defiant, born of fire, with determination, bravery, courage, and as a commitment to all women and girls who are oppressed, standing alongside in unity and solidarity, fighting for equity and social justice. It's a pledge to fight for liberation and freedom. So, that is my little piece, and that's just a flavour of our forthcoming chapter. So you heard it first here. But I'm going to hand over to Beck now, who has Beck from the Women's Centre Cornwall, who has actually put that action, the call out to do something into action. So here's what it looks like in that proactive form. So over to you, Beck. You're on mute.
I'm on mute. I was on mute. I knew I wouldn't get away with somebody yelling at me. I was on mute. I'm no longer on mute. Thank you, Akima. Listen, as always, look, who doesn't want to hear about revolutionary love first thing of a Friday morning? Who doesn't want to be part of that process and that movement and that energy? I do. But I'll start with kind of acknowledging, I guess, sometimes we hear words like revolution, liberation, resistance, social justice, call to action, challenge the system, and I'll own this, it can sometimes feel a bit immobilizing. Where do we start with that? How do we chip away at a system that we know, sadly, is working counterintuitively with women survivors of sexual abuse? So theoretically and fundamentally, we knew at the Women's Centre Cornwall we needed to do something, but I think we found ourselves sometimes in a fog of just knowing what that something needed to look like, when sort of enshrouded and surrounded by all of those structural obstacles and barriers. Arguably, perhaps it's I'm going to do a little bit of reading as well off the page, so bear with if I look down. Arguably, it's often easier to carry on as usual, do what we've always done, arguably turn away, collude, perhaps. But that wasn't working. I think there was a realisation it wasn't working, it wasn't really effective. Nobody was healing, and nobody felt good about it. So it wasn't supporting women in their healing. What was happening is women were feeling buried under a deluge of labels and untreatable diagnosis. In fact, only this week, I saw a colleague yesterday who had taken a helpline call from a woman who wanted to talk about her experiences of childhood sexual abuse, but couldn't connect with that part of her life, even though she wanted to speak about it, because she felt she had to infiltrate a kind of barrier of labels that she'd been given. So there was an alphabet of acronyms, I kid you not, PTSD, complex PTSD, DID, BPD, EUPD, and then oppositional defiance disorder when she challenged it, you know, when she wasn't happy with the kind of routes to support. So we knew we had to do something. Women were getting lost in processes, assessments, flowcharts. And we had to start by kind of pressing pause and just to pick up on something that Akima said. Were we truly survivor-led? Were we truly women-centred? We professed to be, and we wanted to platform and amplify survivors' voices, but were we actually doing that? So we stopped and we thought, and that for us was reassuring, because that forms part of the doing something process. So when the doing something feels daunting and insurmountable, if that's a word, pausing and thinking and having reflection time was doing something. We then, down at the Women's Centre Cornwall, we collaborated with the AD4E and had a conference down in Cornwall, pre-pandemic, just pre-pandemic, March 2020, which was fantastic. So the first time I think there had been a Disorder for All conference down in Cornwall, that lots of people congregated to hear about the alternative ways of thinking. It started to mobilise people's thinking, if not actions at that point. It started to mobilise and wrestle with and nudge people's thinking. It started to wrestle with the status quo. So it's fantastic. That was part of our doing something. And the doing something always feels, I guess, a bit more comfortable when you're doing it alongside others and like-minded people. So I'd encourage anyone where you can, when we're allowed to do so, if you can host and accommodate an AD4E conference, it's a massive bolster in that doing something process. At the Women's Centre Cornwall, we've always felt we had a natural alignment to the notion of survival not being a disorder, and we were keen advocates in the movement of validating women's rational responses to violence and abuse. We were becoming increasingly aware of the burden that women were all too often feeling under the weight of labels, the diagnosis, and the sadly all too common experiences of dehumanising and re-traumatising responses when they spoke their stories. When they tapped into and embraced the courage to speak their stories, the response was often re-traumatising. It's simply not good enough. There is an alternative way as part of the doing something. Women were being brave and courageous with us in speaking their truth, externalising their experiences, often only to be met with a metaphorical diagnostic flowchart to determine what was wrong, or often hearing they were too complex to work with. Women were not only immobilised, curtailed and suffocated by their experiences of abuse, but were further traumatised by breathing in the toxic fumes emitted by labels that told them they were broken, disordered or fractured. Women were separated, and are indeed separated from their experiences, by the chasm created by pathologising language, which led to the notion of healing feeling unreachable and unattainable, a feeling that women would remain forever broken. Ourselves at the Women's Centre Cornwall and at Wagon could no longer collude with that. It's unethical to collude with that. Healing is an absolute possibility for all. We have to be absolute robust advocates of that. So there was a real want to thread the messages and learning from the AD4E conference into everyday work at the centre. And we had a real commitment to do that and to position and centre women as navigators and directors of their own stories and their own truths. So our doing something continued. We had discussions, we challenged one another. We tried to keep the energy of the AD4E conference going, and that culminated, I guess, in a campaign that we rolled out from the Women's Centre Cornwall that was called hashtag survival is not a disorder. Because what we've become increasingly aware of is that women, when trying to tell their truth and explore their experiences of violence and abuse, were being given labels of being disordered or a personality disorder. And then the blocks would come down again. Why why travel along that journey of continuing to try to tell a story if you're told that's wrong, or you're disordered for doing so? So we rolled out an online campaign called Survival is Not a Disorder, and we focused our energy on raising awareness of how women and girls who present with natural and valid emotions and responses to trauma, pain and distress are often labelled and medicated. And we wanted to flip that narrative, not just flip sounds too polite. We wanted to make a big old dent in that narrative. We wanted to full throttle challenge that narrative and honour women's experiences and their stories. So the energy created by that campaign continues to grow, and gradually we see an alliance expand, an alliance of people readied for change and the want to do something. So we know our do something has to continue. We know that giving women power to name and own her own autobiography is crucial in regaining women's autonomy and shedding the imposed labels that can often suffocate women. It's a gradual, ongoing journey, not a one-dimensional, immediate process. We know that systemic shift and change is vital in this process if women's stories and indeed women's existences are to be heard and validated. And so we go on. We continue to do something. We will continue to work to allow women full access to themselves and their experiences. We will continue to work to provide spaces where women can voice their voices and tell their stories. We will continue to honour and validate the plentiful and diverse ways in which women survive and thrive, and we will continue to shout with gusto and conviction that survival and the energy that goes into surviving is in no way a disorder.
Cool. Thank you, Beck. Yeah, that's a rallying call. So I guess there's something about our learning. How do we call you all in to the change? We need to be the change. How are we modelling that? So just as we conclude, I'm just going to give you some powerful, I hope inspiring words from a Black feminist activist. So this is what Angela Davis has to say. So I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. Boom. Secondly is the wonderful Audre Lorde, who reminds us revolution is not a one-time event. So this is our call into you, is to do the revolution every single day, every single moment. Do it with Shanaz, do it with style, do it with grace, and do it with the courage. So that's all, I think, from us. I'm just going to finally hand over to Beck for.
So to end, and following those really powerful words, we'd like to leave you with the words of a survivor, words that represent the voice of many. So let's hear them, let's really hear them, and let's act, let's do something together, okay? So she said, ask me what happened, listen to what I have to say. I'm not broken or disordered, I'm in pain, I feel sad, I have a story to tell. Thank you all. Thanks, Akima.
Peace and love.